So yeah, welcome back everybody. So just a reminder to see the full presentation, if you right click my face and then get it to fit to frame, fit to screen, I forget how it's quite worded, and then we'll see the full presentation. Okay, so yeah, moving now on to core ingredients. So I guess what we'd love you to do is to hold in mind the conversations we were having before lunch, because we're gonna offer the core ingredients of safe, trusted relationships as we see it as psychologists. So have a think about what you discuss in your breakout rooms, about what qualities were in your relationships with safe, trusted adults, and see if these are reflected in the core ingredients I'm going to share with you now. So safety, we've kind of have been speaking about this quite a lot today, but just to kind of really bring us back into why it is, of course, a core ingredient. So a brain can't just be told it is safe. And just because objectively, we might feel that a situation or a moment or the room that we're in right now is safe, it doesn't mean that the young person we're with also feels safe. So true safety is both physical safety and emotional safety. So physical safety is perhaps the more obvious sense of I'm not immediately expecting someone to barge in and to hurt me. But emotional safety is being able to be your true self, because right now in that moment with that person, you do not fear abandonment, ridicule, or threat. So, as we've already discussed, young people's homes may not be able to offer this safety. However, as we'd already been speaking to, you can absolutely offer and create safety in your own context with the young person. You are offering an experience of the circle of security idea shared by Lynn of being an adult who is bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind enough of the time. So I think, yeah, Lynn mentioned earlier that sense of 30% of the time, that's actually good enough. I think what I really like about that sense of it only being sort of 30% of the time is that none of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. We're all going to have ruptures with people, let alone ruptures with young people. What we're aiming for is good enough of the time, and that's the really magic stuff. So next, I'm going to talk about PACE. So PACE stands for Playfulness, Acceptance, Curiosity, and Empathy. So some people may have heard of this before. So it comes from a psychotherapy called dialect developmental psychotherapy. So that's pulled together by Dan Hughes. So he's quite famous in the world of attachment form interventions. So to connect with a young person, they need to feel safe. And PACE gives us a message of safety to another's brain and body. PACE is absolutely a way of being. So it becomes less helpful if you think of it as an approach or a technique, so trying to get your own objectives met. It's a way of being that is just giving a message of safety. And when you kind of give out enough of that paceful message, it's hard for the other person's brain not to pick up on that sense of safety. So let's have a look at it in more detail. So playfulness, so a light-hearted and relaxed approach, enjoy each other's company. The young person will get used to positive emotions and a sense of closeness. So playfulness doesn't necessarily mean playing, but it could be. And of course, it will not always be appropriate to be playful, but it can be an excellent message of safety, as it's really hard to keep feeling anxious or frightened when you're in a playful state. These are two very much kind of almost sort of polar opposite states. So yeah, so not something to always dive into. Of course, if a young person was sharing something really sad from their life, that won't be quite the moment for playfulness, but you will instinctively get a sense of where it could be really useful. So acceptance. So unconditionally accepting the other's thoughts and feelings. Their experience is their experience, regardless of your thoughts and situation. So you may not agree, but what you are doing is you are accepting that for that young person right here, right now, that is how they see things. You're accepting their thoughts, their wishes, their urges, their feelings. We're not accepting bad behavior. So we're not saying it's okay to stand up and punch somebody in the face. But what we are accepting is what's behind it. So we're accepting that behind that young person wanting to punch somebody, perhaps they're feeling really angry, perhaps they're feeling really frightened, perhaps they feel that someone hasn't been fair to them, something unjust has taken place. That's what we're accepting. So to gently wonder what might be going on for that young person at that time. For example, what they might be feeling, thinking, or experiencing. So sometimes when people see curiosity, they wonder if it's a kind of, I don't know, a green light to kind of go, you've got to tell me what it is going on with you. The young person may not actually know what's going on for them. So it's not about being a stern detective. It's more a message of, I'm working really hard to understand because you matter. And then lastly, empathy. So empathy is when we really feel another's emotion, to let them know that they are not alone and that you won't leave them alone in their distress. So it's really about actually having a go at stepping into somebody's shoes, imagining what it is like for them, really being kind of alongside them. And for those who might would have seen an animation by pulled together of a talk that Brené Brown does on empathy. If you haven't seen it already, I thoroughly recommend to pop onto YouTube at some point, type in Brené Brown and empathy. But she really makes the clear distinction of how empathy is not sympathy. Empathy is really about actually kind of being there with somebody. Powerful stuff. So with PACE, we're not saying that you have to do all 4 parts of it, and we're not saying you have to do it in that order. It's just a really helpful framework to hold in mind. And one of the things that we so often say to ourselves in the growth attachment service is we find ourselves noticing at times it can be really, really tricky to kind of know quite what to do when someone in front of you is in distress or you're trying to support them. And what we like as a little reminder is that how in life, when it all goes wrong, you go to A&E, you go to hospital. So it's the same with PACE. If you're not quite sure what to do, just have a go at really stepping into that acceptance, stepping into the empathy, and that will give you a really good grounding for helping communicate that message of safety. Okay, so we'll talk now a bit about co-regulation. So this, yet again, is another circle security idea. As Lynn said at the top of today's talk, we just fell in love with the ways that they take really big concepts and actually make them digestible and fab way of understanding them. So young people can experience incredibly difficult situations, thoughts, feelings. That's a tornado pictured in this diagram. What makes it possible to cope is that an adult is there as the safe hands around that young person's tornado. So this isn't about fixing the problem, even though you might know how to fix it, and even though you absolutely might be able to actually fix it. It's much more about being there. It's about holding the intense feelings, about making it manageable. It's about helping calm, soothe, regulate the young person. Being the hands around the tornado is what makes it bearable. So we often believe that resilience comes from facing really big adversities alone and kind of gritting your teeth and getting through it. But in truth, resilience comes from facing difficulties, but knowing that you are not alone, that support, empathy, and care is there. Somebody is there to fall back on, somebody is there alongside you. So in this way of thinking about it, resilience is not a DIY project. Our route to resilience and self-regulation comes from repeated experiences of co-regulation. So if you were to offer a young person, one thing, if you can give an experience of helping them to regulate, co-regulating them, it's almost like money in the bank, because every single time a young person experiences co-regulation, every single time a young person experiences someone being those hands around the tornado, that is what is making it much more likely that somewhere down the line in the future that a young person will be able to self-regulate. So they'll be able to actually encounter a tricky situation and get through it. The only reason they've been able to do that is because they've experienced co-regulation beforehand. Okay, so those are our core ingredients as psychologists in credit attachment service see it. So we're now going to move into the final section of our talk. So thinking about services as hands on the circle. So again, we have definitely been touching this already today, but we're very aware that already we've been having discussions and talks, sort of speaking to how do we do this? It's really hard often in the context that we have. So return to psychosecurity. So adults in a young person's world all get to be the hands on this circle. Those adults, their time on that circle may be short or long. It might just be for a few moments or possibly spanning over many, many years. That's those adults' moments on the circle might only reflect part of maybe what you see here, so not necessarily the whole thing. But whether we realise it or not, services are the hands on the circle. So it can be incredibly hard for those services, for those workers, to see a young person in distress. Often it's therefore very understandable that they daren't open the can of worms, so to speak. So they don't actually talk about the challenging things that a young person is experiencing. But Gabor Mate puts it wonderfully, that the can of worms is already open. We can choose to ignore it or recognize it. Either way, it is there. By altering your response, by acknowledging the can of worms, you will alter the person's trajectory. So therefore, how we hold our hands is the thing that we can influence, because we can't decide to not be. We're already there. To move just into our final part of this section, thinking about relationships and how that can buffer trauma. So we've got here a quote from Christine Lily Dobson and Bruce Perry, who we've mentioned a few times today. So the bottom line is that relationships matter. The currency for systemic change is trust, and trust comes through forming healthy working relationships. Healthy relation interactions with safe and familiar individuals can buffer and heal trauma-related problems. People, not programs, change people. For me, what this quote really brings up in me is that being a trusted adult in a young person's life might be the most impactful thing that you ever do. So I'm aware that we're a little bit ahead of schedule, Helen, but what we were sort of hoping to do was to lead into a Mentimeter. So please don't worry if you're panicking thinking you were expecting it to happen quite now. But once Helen's ready, we're going to bring up a Mentimeter into the chat. And what the question is going to be asking is, what's one thing would help you to facilitate and support the role of trusted adults in your personal and or working life?
There was one just before that, Matt. Sorry, there was two Mentimeter questions.
Oh, you're quite right. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. Quite right. So yeah, so the first one, there's going to be two Mentimeters. The first one we'd like you to think about, is to hold in mind a person that you described as a trusted adult growing up. How would you describe the feeling of being with them? Thank you, Lynn.
Be with you now. So that is Mentimeter question 4.
Thank you, Helen.
Just posted it now, okay? I'll just give it a couple of minutes for people to start inputting their answers before I show on the screen, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just, yeah, wonderful to see that the biggest words immediately pop up is safe.
It's so impactful seeing all the words together, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about that safety as being, you know, from a neurodevelopmental perspective, absolutely crucial. It just draws that connecting line between relationships with trusted adults and that development.
It's nice to see fun is there as well. And for me, that really sort of speaks to how powerful that playfulness that we were describing is. Having fun, being playful, that is a huge signal of safety.
I can't remember where I've read it, but you can't feel anxious and laugh at the same time. Not even sure if that's a fact, but I just really liked that concept of that playfulness. And
yeah, absolutely. There is what is a fact, and I haven't got the quote to hand, but I can find it, is that you can't experience playfulness and shame at the same time. So the neural circuits that support shame and the neural circuits that support playfulness cancel each other out. One circuit cannot operate whilst the other is operating. So when we're working alongside someone who is in high shame, the most powerful approach that we can take is to engage in a playful way. And as you will all be very, very sensitive to, I'm sure, that doesn't mean kind of laughing raucously when someone's in a place of intense pain. It means that lightness of touch, that we can be in this together. This is okay. Whatever comes up is okay. An enjoyment of being in the presence of the other person is that broader meaning as Matt described. And that's neurologically incompatible with being flooded by shame. So it's a powerful tool.
So earlier on, sorry, incorrectly said that we'd have 2 Mentimeters. What I meant was going to have a Mentimeter followed by a breakout room. So we'll let poor Helen just have a chance to get rid of her Mentimeter and get prepared. As you experienced earlier, it's no small task to go around to breakout rooms. So Helen, please don't rush. Take your time. But just to kind of orientate us to the question we'd like you to think about and reflect on in your breakout rooms. So just really think about one thing that would help you to facilitate and support the role of trusted adults in your personal and or working life. So we want to give a really decent chunk of time for this. So I think we're ahead of schedule, but we'll I think we can easily give 20 minutes as planned, and then maybe even have a bit of a chance to come back as a whole group, and those that are happy to share can share in the big group.
I'm just recreating the rooms now, and I'm hoping this time everybody moves across as they should.
I've just spotted that, Thomas, you've got to leave, and I noticed you had your hand up earlier. Was it to let us know you were leaving, or did you have another question you wanted to ask or reflection you wanted to make before you go?
Yeah, it's a little bit, it might be a little bit long-winded, and maybe it's just something that we can sort of reflect on, but I work with local authorities in terms of commissioning placements for looked after children in the residential market, and I was thinking about that escalation, notice, placement, breakdown cycle that we find, and how that we look for that stable base. We commission the placement based on the fact that they can probably provide a stable base, but then there's an escalation, there's a crisis, there's notice served, and then they're not able to go back to return to that place of safety, even though those attachments are there with the therapeutic teams or the care staff, that the system doesn't allow for them to return and repair. And it was more of an observation than a question, I suppose. That's
a really familiar story, Thomas, and I'm sure for other people who work in similar arenas, it's a story they'll be very familiar with too. Part of my role used to be working in the continuing care team in our health board, thinking about those young people whose placements have broken down and move out of county. And I think the way you describe it, that the system doesn't allow them, is the most accurate description. I think we, as multi-agency systems around children, get really rattled by risk. We get really rattled by things having gotten very difficult. And I think there's probably a bit of a transference, so that emotional contagion with the young people or families we're working with, where we think that once a relationship's broken down, that's forever, possibly at least in part because that's been that child's experience for their life before. And actually, if we challenge ourselves as multi-agency systems to say relationships can be mended, and fragmented multi-agency warring systems, which is quite often what happens around those situations, can be mended and can be healed, that can be an incredibly therapeutic experience for a child and their family to go through. And I would really, really strongly advocate for thinking about how do we maintain connections for children across time. So even if they move to a completely different area or a different system, I think there is a massive, massive moral responsibility for us to try and maintain connections across a child's history, just as any other child would in their family home. So just because a child moves house doesn't mean they never see the people they went to primary school with in the primary school again. The adults in their life facilitate those connections and keep a link, and it might dwindle, but they don't sever. And I think we absolutely have an obligation to think about how we repair and how we model repair for children who might never have experienced that before. It's definitely not easy though.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks a lot for today's session.
No problem. Sorry, we just got to your question just before you had to leave.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Okay. I'm just about to open the breakout rooms, so I'm opening them for 20 minutes, Matt, okay?